Hello viewers, and a warm welcome to the show today. I am your host, Chef Andy, and this evening we have the privilege of course, hosting a guest. Her name is Grace Mayai. I will, of course, allow her to say a few words before we proceed.
Okay, my name is Grace Mayai. I am a soon-to-be lawyer, a blogger, and a great lover of food, and I'm glad to be on the show.
Thank you, Grace. Now, also something I could also add to that, she is also a very, very renowned food blogger, a big Instagrammer as well. And on this particular episode, she's actually going to be joining us in preparing a very, very simple dish, something that most of you have probably had before. We're going to be working on a very simple Chips Mayai. Just to translate that for those who may not be familiar with the term, it's basically an omelette with potatoes. Now, before we begin, I will of course introduce the ingredients that we'll be working with, just to give you a synopsis of what to expect for this next episode. Now, from the very front, we're going to be using some sweet smoked paprika. I'm also going to be using some dried oregano and some dried parsley. You'll also require 1 medium-sized onion, about 2 medium-sized tomatoes, some salt to season with. You will also require about 3 medium or large-sized potatoes. You're also going to require about 4 to 5 eggs, some fresh coriander leaves, some black pepper to season with as well. You will also require some oil to fry with, and of course a little bit of olive oil just to bring a nice, beautiful, harmonic flavor. But before we begin, we will allow you this chance to stretch back, relax, and unwind, and we'll catch you after a very short break. Welcome back, viewers. If you're just tuning in, we're right about ready to start the dish of the day, which is a very, very simple Chips Mayai. Or for some of you who may not understand the Swahili term, this is basically an egg-based dish that we're going to incorporate a bit of some homemade fries, and we're also going to be making that in an oven. So you may actually want to preheat your oven at this stage, which I'm going to begin by doing. And I'm just going to allow that to begin to reheat. I'll probably set it to anywhere between 160 to 180 degrees. I will also mention that for this recipe, you will of course require a whisk, which you'll of course use to whip your eggs. And you will also require any particular kind of oven-proof dish that you may have. Now, if you have one of these particular ceramic or these glass bowls, these are of course very, very handy. They're also very good, particularly if you're going to be moving the dish right from the oven and you're going to plate it directly as is. But remember, you're not of course limited to this. Whichever particular bowl or dish that you may actually prefer to use in your own home kitchen will of course also come into aid for this recipe. All right, so Grace, we're going to start off very, very simply. So we're going to grab our potatoes, And all you're going to do is you're going to allow those to drain very briefly. So just move them into the bowl. Now, something also to share with you, this particular style of strainer may not also be very, very easy to find. But remember, all you're looking at is basically any particular bowl or dish that will allow for you to just drain your potatoes very easily. And if you, of course, don't have any particular strainer at home, you can also use a nice big sieve. Or you can actually also just lay them flat on a countertop, maybe with a bit of some parchment paper or some serviettes. And this is basically just to aid in draining your potatoes before you proceed to chop. So Grace, you will proceed to do the fries.
Yes.
Right now, as I mentioned, we're going to be making some homemade fries. So it's very, very simple. We're going to, of course, to start the process by peeling or slicing our potatoes from the sides. Just, of course, to make it a little easier for you to be able to chop that nice and fine. Now, Grace, I also wanted to find out, have you had a Chips Mayai before?
No, I haven't.
You haven't?
I haven't actually.
What do you think is part of the process of making a Chips Mayai?
Can I say really? I'm not sure, but I feel like you whoop everything together into what we will see.
All right. Well said. So very, very simple. Always begin the process by cooking your fries first. Remember, you can't be able to, of course, get your fries cooked in the egg mixture. So you will, of course, begin by cooking your potatoes. We'll now have to cook them nice and crunchy just to be able to get them to really be light in the mixture. So very important to mention, remember, if you blanch your potatoes for this recipe, they will actually sink to the bottom of the dish, which will, of course, not look particularly like a Chips Mayai. Remember, you do actually have to be able to see that bit of potato sticking out from the top. And the only best way to achieve this is by making sure that your potatoes are cooked till they're completely crispy. And this will, of course, also make them nice and light, and they should actually be able to rise up with the mixture once it begins to bake in the oven. So as Grace continues to finish off, I'm just going to grab some oil and I'll begin to heat that in a pan. Now for this recipe, I'm going to be working with vegetable oil. You can, of course, if you're able to do so, you can proceed to use some olive oil. But remember, it is also a little bit expensive, especially if you're going to just fry. And remember, another thing is vegetable oil is also a nice healthy alternative. You can, of course, also use oils such as canola oil, which are also very, very good in that they're also very, very low in cholesterol. Right, so as she proceeds, I'm just going to begin to heat up my oil, and we'll just give that a bit of time to continue. And while we do so, I'm also going to proceed to crack some eggs into a bowl. Right. Now, Grace, I also wanted maybe for you to just take some time and maybe give us an insight on what it takes to be a law student in Kenya.
It takes for you to pass your KCSE, of course.
Okay, so you really have to be a hardworking student to fit into the law firms.
Yes, but more importantly, it needs a lot of determination, because what you realize is if you have the money, you can go on a parallel program with even a C+, and getting a law degree may not be as easy.
Right.
So you really need to put in the hard work and the long nights, and you need to be able to be a big reader.
Right. Now, something also I wanted to find out, is it something that you were passionate about when you began, or is it something maybe you were coerced into getting into as you chose your career?
No, not really. I don't believe in being coerced into doing something. So it's something that I fell in love with while I was in high school and decided to go for it.
Perfect. Now, also something I could ask in relation to the dish we are preparing. Are you a big fan of having eggs maybe for breakfast or for dinner?
I like fried eggs in the morning.
Okay.
I prefer curries in the evening. I have never had a Chips Mayai. So this is definitely a big learning point for me.
Awesome. So that means you're actually going to take something home with you today. Awesome. All right, now, Grace, as that continues to cook, I will, of course, take you through the process, the next process of preparation, which is, of course, breaking or cracking open our eggs. So I'm just going to turn that board over, and that will, of course, allow us to have a nice, clean, dry surface to work on. Right, so very, very simply, we're going to begin by cracking our eggs in, and I'm just going to show you. No, yeah, we're just going to crack the eggs as whole as they are. So I don't know how you crack your eggs, but I like to do it one-handed. So it's a very simple technique. All you do is hold the egg and, of course, have your index finger right at one end and use your thumb and your middle finger to just hold onto the egg just to make sure it doesn't slip off your hands. And all you're going to do is just tap it very lightly on the side. And all you're going to do now is pretty much tuck your thumb somewhat right under the egg, right next to the crack. And as soon as you press that in, you should actually be able to just crack that open with one hand. Do you want to give it a try?
With one hand?
With one hand, yes.
I'm the old school kind of people who does it with both.
Okay. Well, you can, of course, just go with the method that you know best.
Okay.
All right. So for this particular recipe, also to mention, we are going to be using whole eggs. You can, of course, alternatively just use your egg whites, especially if you're looking at a more healthier option to having your eggs, which, of course, will give you an egg white omelette. But I will also inform you that it may actually be a little harder because you will actually have to whip it a little harder and longer. And there's only one risk to that. You can, of course, have your eggs collapsing completely, and it'll give you a totally different result. But the beautiful thing about this is the egg yolks will, of course, give your egg a little bit of body, and this is this is basically what will give the egg that bit of weight that you're looking for. All right, so you can proceed to. Yes, we're going to go in with all of them. So something.
Looks very interesting, though.
Yes. And it's something you all can be able to do. You can actually try maybe on occasion if you're going to be making eggs in the morning. You can also give it a try at home. I'm sure there's plenty of videos out there that you can also be able to look at. So there's so many other techniques you can be able to learn from as well. Right, so now all our eggs are in the bowl. And now as we continue to just allow for our potatoes to cook to their crisp stage, do you need to wipe your hands? All right. All right, now next up you will grab the salt that's to your right. And we're basically going to add a nice generous pinch. So maybe take, yes.
A bit more?
Yes, a bit more. So that should be about half a teaspoon. Right, now all you're going to do is whip that mixture completely. And now this is basically to be able to break that yolk. This will also aid in making sure that we've got one nice consistent mixture. And while you do so, I'm also going to mention some of the tips that I've learned through trying this out on occasion. Remember the original Chips Mayai that you will actually be, that you may actually encounter being made on the street, because we also consider it one of our most beloved street foods here in Kenya. Most of us actually prefer to actually cook the fries. And what we do is we pour the fries onto a hot pan and we pour the egg mixture in. And you can actually cook it as you would for a regular omelette. But because we're also trying to be a little more creative and you're also looking at beautiful options to impress your family at home, we're going to be doing it in an oven, which is, of course, a very, very different technique to what most people have done before.
Indeed.
Right, so your eggs are whipped. Now, next up, you can grab a bit of that olive oil. And we're just going to put just a little bit inside our baking dish. Right, simple as that. Awesome. Now what you're going to do next is just using your fingertips. I would like you to just rub the oil all the way around the bowl. Of course, working your way all the way to the rim of the bowl. And now this will basically allow for us to get that egg out of the dish nice and easy. Remember, without greasing the dish, it may actually stick to the container and you may actually have to really, really struggle to get it out. But of course, when you run a bit of olive oil or even some vegetable oil through your dish, you can also alternatively use some melted butter, which is of course a little bit also on the higher expensive end, just as the olive oil will. But remember, if you don't have any of the two available to you, vegetable oil will do just fine.
Would you recommend for people to use Blue Band?
I would say Blue Band being one of the cheaper option to go with. One particular thing is I find Blue Band to be very bland in flavor. So what happens is you may actually not be able to get a bit of an aroma coming through.
Okay.
So I would always recommend, if you can actually be able to find even some of these flavored oils, you can actually be able to purchase some hazelnut oil in the market. Those particularly also give it a nice, beautiful general flavor. And it will actually, as soon as it hits the oven, you can actually get that beautiful aroma from the character of the olive oil. Right, so once that's done, we're just going to set that aside. And we'll of course proceed to chop up some of our ingredients. So I'll just give you a moment to just rinse your hands before we proceed. Giving me just a bit of time to of course check on our potatoes. And as you can hear from the bowl, you can actually be able to hear the crunchy potatoes in there. These are now also evenly, nicely browned, as you can see from the cameras. And as soon as you can actually get that crunch coming through, you can proceed to turn your heat off completely. And what we're going to do is we're just going to strain this out. So I'm just going to quickly take that out of the dish. Always important to give it a little shake, allow the excess oil to pour out. And while I do so, I think, Grace, you can actually take advantage of this opportunity to chop up some of our onion, and you can also proceed to work on the tomatoes. And for this, we're basically going to chop them nice and fine. Remember, this is also going to enrich the flavor and the appearance of the omelette. You can, of course, also go very, very simply by just adding your egg to the fries, but remember, it may actually not really look presentable. It won't look appealing presented. So the onions and the tomatoes will also break the monotony of that yellowness of the egg, and it will actually give you a little hints of color. And you can also be able to achieve the same by also frying up some peppers, which will also give it a nice, beautiful general appearance. Right, so I'm just going to finish taking those out. And as I mentioned as well, it makes it very, very simple, especially if you're going to be draining potatoes from the oil. Strainers also come in handy in that they will actually allow for the excess oil to pour to the bottom of the bowl. And you can actually be able to pour your oil back into the pot, allowing and making sure that you don't actually waste any of your oil. Right, so potatoes are out. We're just going to set our oil aside to cool off. And we're also going to give that just a few minutes to continue to drain. But as we do so, I am of course going to take a break at this stage just to clear up our station. But please don't touch that dial. You definitely don't want to miss what we're going to be doing next. So see you in a little bit. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who are just tuning in, my beautiful co-host of the day is Grace, and she's been pretty much doing all the chopping today, giving me quite a bit of time to entertain you with all this talk. But as she proceeds to get to the end of the process, we'll of course start to combine everything else. So I will of course start the process by combining our chopped onions and our chopped tomatoes in a bowl. And now this, we're not going to fry them up as I normally would, because we are going to bake them, and which means of course they are going to really play a very important part in giving a bit of fragrance and a bit of aroma to the egg mixture. Right, so very simply I will proceed to just mix those in a bowl. Simple as that. And now, Grace, you can proceed to add our coriander to the bowl as well.
Okay.
Right, so very also important to mention, especially when making omelets or any particular egg dishes, remember eggs may actually be very rich and bland, but you can actually of course incorporate some beautiful ingredients that of course bring a nice beautiful balance of aroma, and they of course also impact some flavor and also give it a nice beautiful nutritional balance all around. All right, so Grace, that is now done. Now what I will do is I'm going to move that to your side, and I'm also going to give you this bowl to begin to move our potatoes in. So I'm actually going to give you a pair of tongs. So now proceed to just add the potatoes into the baking dish. And now as we proceed, I'll also mention that we have not seasoned the potatoes at all. Remember, most of our seasoning of course has gone into the eggs, but we are going to add a few more ingredients to that. So as Grace continues, I'm also going to, as you could have heard from the back there, the ringer has actually gone on, and this pretty much tells us that the oven is now ready for use. So I will of course turn that on again, because now the oven is nice and hot. This means as soon as the mixture goes in, it will of course begin to cook immediately. Right, simple as that. Right, now we're just going to give that a mix, very slight mix, and then we're going to add that to our dish with the potatoes. Right, now as you also continue to mix, I will also season that just a little bit, of course, with a bit of salt. We're also going to add just a bit of black pepper powder. Right, now once that's mixed in, you can of course now pour that into the dish. Of course, taking time to scatter it all around. Now also very important to mention, remember this particular dish does not really have any particular recipes. Remember, it actually gives you quite a bit of room to be creative. You can of course also add chilies to the mixture if you're looking for a little bit of heat. You can also, as I mentioned earlier, you can also incorporate other vegetables to this, like peppers, courgettes, and those will of course also give a nice beautiful balance, and it also aids in giving a nice beautiful balance of color. Right, now once that's in, you're just going to toss it a little bit while it's in the bowl. Okay. So this is basically just to make sure that you don't really have just one layer of potatoes and another layer of tomatoes and onions and the coriander. All right, I'll just take that away. Right, I'm just going to turn that over once more. Right, now before we proceed to add in our egg, I will of course allow you to season with a bit of some basil, so you can just take a pinch.
Okay. Put it in the egg.
All right, and then we'll also incorporate a bit of some dried parsley. And these are particularly very easy to find in the shop, so you can be able to find this locally. And then of course my most beloved ingredient, some beautiful smoked paprika. Now this particularly brings a nice balance of flavor. It doesn't really add heat, but it actually gives a beautiful flavor, and it also aids in getting rid of that eggy taste from your egg omelette. So we're also going to add a small pinch of that to our eggs. So what you can do is give that a nice whipping just before we proceed to add that to the dish. Right, now once that's done, you're just going to proceed to add the mixture into the baking dish. So you'll just go right around, just go around the sides, and then finish off at the center. And I could also share another tip as well for some of you who are of course cheese lovers. Remember, you can also be able to purchase some local cheese, chop that up nice and small and add that to the mixture. And as I said, just the way you'd have very many other recipes that you can incorporate into omelets, you can actually bring the same exact details onto this very simple dish, and it will actually work very, very nicely. Right, so once that is done, we're of course going to just give that a mix while it's in the bowl. This is of course to make sure that we have the egg coming up to the surface, and also make sure that all the ingredients are of course coated in the egg before it goes into the oven. So you basically just need to give that a mix as we're doing. Simple as that. Very important to also try and scoop, or rather push down, the ingredients that are still attached to the sides of your dish. And of course, just to finish that off, you can of course drizzle a bit of that around. And you'll actually be able to see them stick out as soon as the egg rises to the surface. Right, so yes, a little bit more. Right, and then same thing with the dried parsley. And now, just to mention, this will of course go into the oven and continue to bake right up until the egg has almost doubled in thickness. And we'll of course be able to see it very, very simply once it's done. So Grace, you want to do us the honor of throwing that in the oven? I'm just going to hold that open for you. So all you're going to do is put it right in the center and push it all the way to the back. Yeah.
That's hot.
Yes, very, very important to mention that your oven should actually be nice and hot, because it also aids in raising the egg a little faster.
Okay.
Remember, what happens is, if your oven is not hot enough, what happens is the egg will split. And what happens is all the egg will get to the base, so all the whisking that you've been doing in incorporating a bit of air will actually go to waste. So what happens is, as soon as you're done with the mixture, always just throw it into a hot oven, and you're basically just going to set your timer for anywhere between 10 to 12 minutes. You can of course check once it's almost halfway done, just to make sure you also don't overcook it.
Okay. The cold air doesn't affect anything when you're checking.
Now, the beautiful thing about preheating the oven is, once the temperature comes up, the cold air is already removed. So what happens is, once it goes in, all you have is a vacuum of hot air, which of course means the temperature is actually going to be more average distributed, as opposed to if you put it in with the oven still on low heat. Because what happens is, as you turn it up, the temperature could also overcook the egg, and what happens is you can actually have one side of the egg cook really quickly, and the other one that actually may actually stay very, very raw. All right, so as we continue to allow that to cook, we are going to give you another chance to take a break. But when we do come back, I and Grace are going to show you what the final product looks like, and we'll also share some very, very simple serving suggestions. So please don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We're right now at the last and final part of this particular episode. And now I will, of course, begin by taking out our Chips Mayai. Right, Grace, as you can see, this is a simple dish I was telling you about. We will of course take time now to just slice through it, and we're going to plate it very simply. Okay. So I'm just going to ask you to do the honors.
With the spoon.
Yes, so all you're going to do is just press right down one straight line, and then do the same on the other end, because I want you to scoop out the piece right in the middle. Okay. So take the middle third. Okay. Yeah. And then careful, this is hot. All right, just press down like that, yeah, and go towards the end. And then make another one from there. Right, so our egg is now also nicely puffed up, as I mentioned. Now you're also going to work your way through the sides. Just press it in like that, and then do the same thing on the other end. So you're basically just detaching it from the edges. There we go. And I'll help you to lift that from the dish. So very simply, once this is done, you should actually be able to slice through using a spatula. And you can now proceed to lift that off your dish and straight onto a plate. Simple as that. So I'm just going to let this sit on the side. And of course, as you can be able to see, it's nicely built up. It's nice and dry right to the bottom. Yeah. So the one particular point that you need to check on is always right at the bottom. You should actually make sure that it's actually cooked dry. And that should actually give you the insight now that the egg is actually cooked. Okay. And there's not any liquid at the bottom of the dish. So now to finish that off, I like to simply garnish very simply by just pinching a fresh bunch of some coriander. And that I'm just going to set on the side of the plate like that. Simple and easy, yeah?
Yes, very.
Right, now always remember to season. So you will of course take a bit of salt and just season right over the top. Okay. So just a nice light drizzle of some salt over the top. And then last but not least, you can crush over some black peppercorns. Going around the sides. Perfect. Okay. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is as simple as done. As I had mentioned in the show, we were of course making a very simple egg dish, as I mentioned. I did of course also mention that you can actually be able to cook the same dish on a very hot pan. Probably just cook it as you would for an omelette. But this of course is now complete, and we can consider that done. So I hope you've actually managed to learn something on the show today. I'm actually glad I've learned how to make it. Awesome. Means it was actually a good visit that you paid us today. Indeed. Awesome. Now, as we wrap up the show, I will of course remind you that you can actually be able to get back to us with a bit of feedback through our Facebook page. That's BrandPlus TV Kenya. And of course, if you've missed out on this and many other episodes that we've had in the recent past, including the one that we just had today, you can of course check out our YouTube page. You can subscribe as well. Do leave us a comment there, and we'll of course get back to you when the need arises. But for now, we are of course going to bid them farewell. And I will of course allow for my host for today to just dig in and give that a little taste before we call it a day. Okay. So just cut through any particular point just to make sure that it's actually nicely cooked through. It's a good thumbs up from you. Very wonderful. All right. With that said and done, we will of course bid you farewell, and until the next episode, God bless you and bye-bye.